Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be talking with you guys today. I know you've had some training on social news gathering already, so hopefully it won't be a lot of repeating. I wanted to show you a couple of our case studies and a little bit about our workflow at Storyful, and then hopefully that'll kind of add to your background on social news gathering. If you're not familiar with Storyful, we're a social news and insights verification agency. So we are essentially our newsroom, which is about 50 journalists located around the world, are responsible for monitoring social media for breaking news and identifying eyewitnesses who are at the center of breaking news events, and then finding their videos, their photos, verifying that they're real, getting rights for use from the people who own them, and then getting that to newsrooms so that news organizations around the world can use those photos and videos in their newscasts and know that they're real and that they're correct and that no one's had it stolen from them along the way. So that is largely what we do. So I wanted to take you a bit through how we do verification once we've found something on social media, and some tips and some case studies from there, and then we'll go to questions at the end. You'll have to forgive me in advance if I cough or I lose my voice. I've been sick the last few days, so it's to be expected. So at Storyful, are very much of the belief that there's always somebody that's closer to the story than journalists. Because as journalists, as much as we want to be the first ones to get anywhere, or we want to be on the scene, we can't predict the future. We don't always know when news is going to happen. So sometimes the best people who are at the center of these stories are the people who are there, who are eyewitnesses, they're participants, they're activists, whatever the case might be. They're already there on the ground, and that's why we do what we do of connecting newsrooms to the people who are at the center of news events. So our process generally, kind of on the large scale, is that we're focusing on discovery. So in terms of searching for news, searching for eyewitnesses, I know you guys have done some work in that, verifying so the authenticity of the video, the photo, and also the person, of what their tie is to it. But we'll get into that some more later. And then acquiring, so making sure rights and permissions so that nobody feels like they've been taken advantage of when something is used by a news organization. So whenever we're doing verification, we really approach it from a very traditional journalism kind of background. It's very manual. It's also very familiar for anyone who has done traditional journalism. I kind of refer to it as interviewing the content. So we're going to go from the premise that this is a video. So a video shared on social media, maybe it's on Twitter, maybe it's from VKontakte, maybe it's from Instagram. But assuming that it's a video in this case, we're going to interview this content and see what we can find out about it and see if we feel confident passing this on to a news organization to use. So the major points that we look for when we're verifying a video are the source. So this person who took the video, what their tie is to the story, who they are, why they were there. The time and date, so to make sure that we know when this happened, and generally if it lines up with other things that we know about the news event. And the location. We want to make sure that we know exactly where this happened and if this piece of content lines up with what we know about the turn of events and where they took place. So starting with the source, which is largely the most important part, is really looking into their accounts. So say this was a video that's posted on Twitter, we'll look over their accounts and see, okay, does this look like a real person? Is this someone who is often using this account? We ask these sorts of questions. Where are they posting from? What's their connection to all of this? Especially if, let's say it's a story that's supposed to take place in Ukraine, and we're seeing an account where they're sharing all this interesting information, but their account says that they're in New York or they're in London. You have to wonder, what is their connection to the story? Maybe they still have one. It's not necessarily wrong, but when you start to look into everything that's possible there, you want to know that you want to know at least the background of where they're coming from and why they might be a part of that But also when the account was created is really important. If it looks like it's a new account, they haven't updated anything in a while, or anything that seems a little bit out of the ordinary, we have to ask a lot of questions about that. Often you'll see that there'll be hoax accounts that are created, and have been created like the day before, and won't have very many followers. They won't be following very many people, or it'll be a copy of someone else's account. So you see that a lot on Facebook and on Twitter, but I think it's just something that we always have to be on the lookout for. And ideally, what we want to do, one of the best tools that we have in our arsenal in terms of verifying the source is actually getting in touch with them, because we have to do that to get permission anyway. So in order to try to get in touch with them, we're going to, for one thing, we'll reach out to them. We'll send a message on whatever platform we found it on, send a message on there, try to get them on the phone, try to get them on email, just so that we can talk to them a bit about what they've seen, what they were a part of, and about their video. Also, if we can't get that, we can't find a way to contact them through there, or maybe it's a little bit noisy and everybody's doing that, we'll do searches on their username and find other linked accounts. We'll start looking around the web for other info we can find from them, not even just what we can see on that page, but really what we can find out about them across the internet. So that can be anything from looking on LinkedIn, seeing where do they work, could we call their workplace if it's somewhere that they might be at work by now, are they listed in online phone databases, can we call them through there? 'Cause all of this boils down to not only verifying who they are and they're tied to the story, but we need to find out, do they actually own the video that they posted? Because pretty often we'll find that people don't often own the videos that they're posting online. So actually something we see a lot, and it's really one of the biggest kind of red flags I can put out there, is often we see things where the video is real, that the report is a real thing, but it's just that the person who shared it is not the person who was actually there. It may be that they were sharing it from a friend, maybe a friend sent it to them in WhatsApp, or they saw it on another platform and they're sharing it out there. And they're not usually even doing this maliciously. It's just people who, they don't really think about ownership that way. They just want to share this video with their friends and don't really consider the fact that they don't own it, and then it might seem misleading. So sometimes you see this in the form of scraper accounts, where these are people who are just putting together social media profiles that are using videos and photos from across the web that they think are really cool, but they're not the original person that owns it. So that's one reason why we have to look into the source, is that this person clearly hasn't actually filmed these videos themselves, because they're all over the place and they're from many different countries, many different places. So that's something where we have to be on the lookout for someone who is scraping videos from someone else. And so getting on from the source, going to the location, I mentioned earlier that we have to see what the source's connection is to that place. So if they're saying that they're on the scene of a major terrorist attack in London, but they're from the US, do they have things that lead up to that to tell us why they're there? Were they getting pictures of them getting off the plane, a selfie in front of some landmark, something to tell us that they had a reason to be there, and really what their connection is into a larger story. Are they an activist? Are they in law enforcement? There's just a way to know what their background is, helps for that, but it also helps for the location of knowing how that lines up. Now, some social media services and some content that's on there will be automatically geolocated because somebody uploaded it from a phone. That's not always 100% verified. It's a good start, but keeping in mind that the video or photo is going to be geolocated to wherever the phone is. It could be that they could have filmed that at a different time, in a different place, and then just chose to upload it from the place and time that they did. They could also have downloaded it from somewhere else on the web and uploaded it then, and it would still look like it happened now in that location, because there's really no way for the social networks to know that that wasn't something that was originally shot right there. So for us, one of the main things that we're doing to do that kind of verification for location is watching the video and seeing what kind of landmarks we can find out of that. Street names, signs, registration plates, anything that we can then go into Google Earth and Google Street View and make sure that we know exactly where that happened. So when we're passing along a video to a newsroom, we will ideally be able to have it down to coordinates as to where it was shot from so that we can know exactly where that is. It's a lot harder when someone is indoors. You can't really do that much on the location verification. So from there, we have to be a little bit more general. And sometimes it's going to be things like accents or dialects that can really help us on that front, or anything that they're referencing in the speech if there's someone talking in the video that can help us to also figure out, at least generally, where this is taking place. And then in terms of the date, which is sometimes the hardest thing to verify if we don't have lots of reports corroborating against one another. For when we look at the time of the upload, which is put onto the post when it goes on social media, it's a little bit challenging at times because the timestamps on every single post and every single network is different. So some networks are based in your time, like where you are. Sometimes it's based in the time where the uploader was, and often we're seeing that they're actually just on a set time zone. So Twitter is based in California time, for instance. So if you're looking at a time on there, you can't automatically assume that it lines up with the time of where the story was taking place. It could be against your time or against California time or New York time or UTC time. So just making sure that you know that when you're going and looking at a platform to determine time. And obviously one of the main ways that we're going to look into dates is making sure that we're able to line that up against what other sources are reporting. If there's a major story happening, more than one person is going to send information out about it. So even if we're ahead of things like law enforcement and news sites that are going to have other ways for us to corroborate information, we can at least see what other people on social media have said. Were there other witnesses? Did other people report the same thing? If we need to get very, very technical, we will look at things like shadows and weather reports. So if we're trying to look at time of day, there's a great tool called Find My Shadow that can help you determine what the time of day is depending on where a shadow falls in a photo or video. And weather reports, the same thing. If you're seeing the video, it says it takes place in Ireland on Sunday, but it's bright sunny skies and you know it was raining there on Sunday, then you have to wonder, maybe this didn't actually happen on that day, or maybe it's not really that location. So we use a tool called Wolfram Alpha that helps us look at weather reports, because you can see weather reports in other locations and going backward in time. So you can even see, 2 months ago on that day, what was the weather like in that place. And in terms of photographs, it's really helpful to check out the exchangeable image file data, which is embedded inside of original photos. And that'll tell you everything from exactly where it was filmed, when it was filmed, the direction the person was facing. I mean, you can get a lot of information out of EXIF data. And there are some great tools that you may have heard in your past sessions, but there are EXIF viewers online that will tell you everything about it. Now, photos that have been taken off of social media or been passed around a lot probably aren't going to have that data embedded. And that's one way to tell if you have the original, is if there's data inside of it using one of these free EXIF data tools. So another thing to look out for, and that we encounter a fair amount, is, again, that the content's real, but in the context of it is wrong. That it was at one point, it's a real video, but it's not necessarily being portrayed in the right way by the person who's sharing it. We run into this a lot, and this is actually what I think the heart of a lot of the fake news that you see out there really looks like. So this is a video that was shared during the Brussels airport attack last year. And this had been passed around just within a few minutes of the blast happening, saying it was CCTV footage from inside the airport. Oh, sorry, I went too far. And we knew from this, and we'd seen it before, but also just from lining up what we could see inside of the airport, that this is actually an old video. This was from an attack in Russia a few years beforehand. And a lot of things didn't line up about it. For one thing, I think you can kind of tell that this is filmed off of a screen, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if someone had a CCTV footage that was pretty quickly turned around from an event like that, it would be filmed off of a screen, which is something that's a little suspicious. But also the fact that it was up so quickly. This was within just a few minutes of this attack happening. And you wouldn't think that maybe that would be one of the first things that someone would put online. It seems like a very, very fast time. But also it didn't at all line up with the interior of what we knew of the airport to look like. We were able to know, and we'd seen this before, actually several times, that this video was from Russia a few years beforehand. This is one that happened just this past fall. There was a guy who had shared this saying that he was protesting outside of a theater performance in New York because they had badmouthed Donald Trump and Mike Pence. And this didn't line up for a variety of reasons. For one thing, the theater in New York is on a smaller side street, the theater they were talking about. And this is one of the main avenues in New York. And none of the geography makes any sense. But in addition to that, we'd actually seen this same exact video before. So this first time it was posted on November 9th. By this time it was posted November 19th. But he'd posted the same exact video on November 8th and had said it was a totally different thing. So still a real video, but not really happening in that same place at that same time or about that same event. Reverse image searching can also be a really big help in terms of figuring out if something is legitimate, if the context of it is correct, if the location and the date are correct. A couple of years ago here in the US, there was a guy named Freddie Gray who had been shot by police, and it had been very controversial, and there were lots of protests around that. And the protests had gotten pretty violent, and there was lots of content on social media, lots of reporting coming from social media about it. So in this case, this particular tweet, and there were several like it, were kind of bragging about rioting and looting and destroying property from accounts that were much like this, kind of written in vernacular. And a lot of this was being used by news organizations and sort of pointing to all these protesters being terrible, not good people. It's all very violent. Now, there was some violence and looting, but we looked into this because we were kind of suspicious about some of these accounts, and this was not the only one. But so in this case, we did a reverse image search using TinEye, though we also will use Google Images sometimes to do reverse image searching. So we found that this particular photo that had been shared by that account had been online at least 8 other times before. So that's kind of an indicator that maybe that isn't real. Like, you should get 0 at that point, especially if it's new. And it turns out that this had been taken off of a news story that had been published, what was that? It was 3 years earlier. And this was actually from Pakistan, of a vandalized KFC inside of Pakistan. So not only was this photo not from Baltimore and not from that event, in terms of doing more reverse image searching on this particular account, the account itself was not real either. This guy's account had been invented using photos that were stolen from other accounts, a made-up name, and a lot of made-up reporting that was coming to essentially make those protesters look bad. We saw 3 other accounts that were doing roughly the same thing, bragging about stealing, bragging about destruction of property. And those 2 were also made up and were stealing different videos from across the web to make that case. And another case study I really want to show you, because I think it gives you an idea of really all the steps of the process and how we do what we do. So this is from a plane crash in Taiwan in February of 2015. So the first indicator that we had of this crash and that it had happened was from the Twitter account for English language news here in Taiwan. So all we knew was the kind of plane it was and that it had crashed. Within a few minutes, we found a tweet that had this photo in it. And in case you don't know Mandarin Chinese, the tweet says that this was taken from the user's dash cam on their car, which is a pretty remarkable image. And for us, if it's something that's really, really remarkable looking, we usually will question, like, how can this possibly be real? So in zooming in on the image first, we took a look at this website called Flight Aware to look up the kind of model of plane that had crashed, to see how it compared against the look of the plane that's shown here. So we were able to compare the wheels on the bottom and the fuselage on the base of this airplane with what we found online, to show that it is the same model of airplane that had crashed. In continuing our search, this is going to be a little loud, I think. We found this video, which you'll see the plane come in from the left here in a second. So in that case, this video from the same event and allegedly depicting the same thing, though from a little bit further away, gives us a lot more information to work with. So we have a timestamp, which we can't always rely on that, but it's a good start. But we also have a moving image that's showing us street signs, it's showing us buildings, markings on the pavement. So from there, we were able to take some of those street signs that we saw and actually find the site of where the plane seemed to cross on Google Earth. And this location, we ended up being just a few meters away from what ended up being the crash site of the plane. So that was just from looking around in here and seeing what lined up against that video. Remarkably, we also found another video of the same thing. This time, this was on an account that really had almost no information in it, but a much better view of the airplane. Which that one is a pretty predictable response. I know I would probably respond that way if a plane crashed in front of me. This one was extremely similar to the first videos. And it was interesting with this particular video that once again we were able to line up streets with Street View and against the second video that we'd seen. But there wasn't a lot of information on this particular video when it was shared on YouTube. We couldn't find any contact information. There was no real name. We had to go back through their videos, and in one video they'd had a video from Twitch, the video game playing website, where we got to see their username on Twitch. And then from there, we're able to piece that together to find their real name and find their real name on Facebook. And then we got in touch with them on Facebook, and it turned out that the person who posted this was the woman who you heard in the video, who was riding with her friend, and it was her friend's dashboard camera. So we first got in touch with her on Facebook, ascertained that she was there, she told us what happened, but also that she didn't own the video, even though she had posted it. It belonged to her friend. So we were able to talk to him, get permission to use this, and get this on the air across lots of different newsrooms in the world within a very, very short time period. I'd say it was within an hour that we had all of these videos cleared and online. I think the most remarkable aspect of this was, well, for one, that there are 3 videos that we could see from this particular event, but that all of these corroborating against one another. For one thing, we could verify that these were real, where the site of the crash had been, that the first tweets that we'd seen, that also was real because it lines up against these other 2. And that all of this gives us a really well-rounded view of exactly how this plane went down and really what had happened there. So this is where without having my notes is going to be a little tough, because you can't view notes in Google Hangouts. So we're gonna see what we can do. A last thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about before we open to questions was about social footprinting. This is something else that we do in addition to photos and videos and verifying those, is that when we can get information about someone that's in the news and really get an idea of how we can, for one thing, find out everything we can about them, and get that information to newsrooms so that they, for one thing, they don't have to go do that themselves, but also to sort of help tie lots of loose strings together based on what we can find out about these people in the news online. So in one of these cases, this guy his name is Dylan Roof. He, the summer before last, he had went into a historically black church in the South, in South Carolina, and had killed a bunch of people. And he'd been arrested. We knew his name. And as soon as we knew his name, we started looking into him. But in the hours after his arrest, there was a digital manifesto that popped up online. We found out about it from this tweet, which this account had almost no information on it, but this tweet had said, check out this website, this lastrhodesian.com. And on this site, there were some photos, and there was a long manifesto that was supposed to be allegedly from Dylan Roof, this guy, before he'd gone to commit this crime. And we needed to find out, is this really his site? Is this really tied to the story? Is this somebody else trying to kind of, make themselves part of a story or trying to add something to it just so that they could get into the news? So we decided to look into this site. Now there's going to be some images in here that are a little bit disturbing, but they're not real. Any of them that have blood in them are actually stills from movies that he had on his site, just so you guys know, and it's not too freaky. It's fake blood. So one of the things that we did was look into this site on Whois. So this is where you can actually look up ownership. We could figure out, okay, what do we know about the site and when was it created? So from looking on Whois, we were able to find an email account for the person who registered it. We were able to get a street address, and we got a name, which you can see that the name, Dylan Roof, he had registered this address, and it did line up against his address that we'd already known. So that's one thing. So we also did a search here where we were looking at a JavaScript query. This is one of those fake photos, I promise. Where we did a JavaScript query using a JavaScript tool that's built into Chrome, where we could actually see when was the last time that the site had been updated, page by page, but also the overall site. And from this, we were able to figure out that it had been updated just a couple of hours before the crime had taken place, which also really seems to indicate that this was his page. In looking around on the site, we also found a zip folder full of images. Some of them were from movies, like the last one. Some of them were just pictures that Dylan Roof had taken. But all of them, we could see when we ran them through an EXIF viewer. We saw that they were shot on a very particular model of Nikon handheld camera. And then we also found this photo, which not only shows Dylan Roof, who we'd already seen his mugshot by then, but it also had the exact camera that most of those photos had been taken on in this picture, the blue camera that he's holding in his hands. This particular jacket he's wearing as well was also in his mugshot, so we were able to line a lot of that up as well. And with that point, we're able to actually prove that this was his site. We couldn't necessarily prove that he'd written it at that point, but at least we knew that the site had been recently updated and had been touched by and had been set up by Dylan Roof. And lots of the news organizations that we work with found this very, very useful in terms of their reporting on this story as it happened. And you can see that same photo, actually, that same jacket was on his Facebook page. You can see those patches there. And the EXIF data we returned, you can see that here. It was a Kodak EasyShare C1530 camera. The same one that's in there. One last case study I wanted to run through with you. So this guy, Hadid, was identified in the news as being one of the suicide attackers in the Paris attacks in December of 2015. And so as soon as we had his name, we got to work at trying to find out what we could about him. So for one thing, we had found him on Facebook, and it took some doing because he had this account called Billy Do Hood. And the only reason that we were really able to put together that was him is that we'd had a photo, we were able to line it up against some of the ones on Facebook, but also some of the public comments that were on these photos were calling him Deitch, like the word for ISIS, as an insult from some of his friends. And so that was something that was an indicator that we at least had the right account on here. And one of his profile photos had a picture of this the Versailles apartment complex, which is kind of it's a project in Molenbeek district in Brussels, and that was there was at this point there wasn't much indication that he particularly was from there, though there was some reporting already done that some of the other attackers had been from Brussels. They did not have the exact neighborhood yet, but he'd had this picture on his account, and also this one that was of him and some of his friends in front of the sign that's in front of this Versailles apartment complex. We were able to identify just from lining that up against Google Earth that, yeah, that's exactly right in front of this complex where it was, where this guy was from. You can see here some of the responses on some of these photos. So like that, you're ISIS here. From looking at his Facebook account and going through what we could see here, we were able to find out that that this guy he'd gone on a trip that he had at least had posted on Facebook that he had gone on a vacation in Turkey, and he had some pictures like this from this trip. But it's we believe, based on the timeline of what had also been reported from some of our clients, that on the same trip he'd gone to Syria for the first time and started to scope out how he was going to go and join ISIS there. So we at least had these photos that were on his Facebook page that were from the same trip, though not when he was in Syria. So that was something we were able to put together just on timeline basis of what had already been reported from when he had moved over to Syria for good. This was another photo from that particular gallery and that particular trip. Oops, there we go. And we had this person who had put out online that they had gone to school with this guy and they'd done Taekwondo and that they'd known him and shared a lot of information about him on social media. But also, from looking into them, we were able to figure out exactly what the school was. And the school actually had photos online of some of the classes. And this was one that we'd found that actually had the suicide bomber in there. So we're able to get a lot of background as to which school he was in, which neighborhood he came from. And this was before all the media had really gone into Brussels and started to do a lot of reporting there. So this was a really big help to the journalists who were on the ground that knew exactly where to go, where to find this apartment complex, where to go to the school, who to talk to there to finally kind of complete their story and know exactly what they were looking for on this guy and then thus several of the other suicide bombers. So here's some additional resources, and then I think from here we should open up to some questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mandy. Please feel free to post questions, anyone. Can I just ask in the meantime, would it be possible if you could share the link to your presentation or the presentation with our students?
Yeah, sure. I can at least share it as a PDF. That'll make it so it's not so heavy.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I went a little fast.
Hello. I might have a question regarding the teaching of, let's say, well, basically fact checking on high schools or at universities. Do you have any information about? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So my question would be whether you have any experience about or basically subjects on universities or on high schools regarding fact checking or training of future journalists and their ability to fact check information on a well, in the programs that are dedicated to those journalists. Is in the Western countries something like that somewhere?
That's a good question. I think this is something that has only recently gotten a lot of attention, and that fact checking and verification like this, but also fact checking of journalism at large, has only recently gotten a lot of attention. So there are not very many schools that have been teaching this, though I get the impression that a lot of them are now trying to find ways to incorporate this into their programs because of everyone's concerns about fake news and stories being passed around that aren't true. In terms of programs in particular, I'm trying to think. I know the schools that have been doing it, they don't have a set training program just for that, but they'll incorporate that into some of their other classwork. We work very closely with the City University of New York. They have a social journalism program where they learn a lot about social verification, and they're really one of the only schools. Well, that and I think that the London City School does as well. Actually, they both do social media verification training for their student journalists, which is a great start. I think it's a skill that all journalists should know how to do. But really, fact checking at large of what that really means to double verify everything in a story is something that a lot of programs that I think within the next year we'll see a lot more of that.
Okay, so it's a university in I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the university that you've mentioned. They have that's a social journalism program. Is that
It's the City University of New York.
City University in New York?
Yeah. Yeah, and usually they're listed online as CUNY, so CUNY.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I actually would like to ask you, I mean, Storyful has been around like since 2013, I guess. How you perceive from inside of Storyful the change of the situation? Because I mean, the fake news is now the buzzword, but obviously, at least at the minimum from the Arab Spring, I mean, there was a lot of question about verifying this user-generated content. So how did you perceive the change of trends since the founding of Storyful?
Yeah, Storyful's been around in some incarnation since 2010, and I always say now that we've been concerned about fake news for years before everybody else seemed to take notice of it. So for us, we've really seen a couple of major shifts. I mean, for one thing, there's a lot more reporting going on social media of eyewitness reporting than there used to be. I mean, the Arab Spring was sort of the catalyst for what started our company, but and even then there wasn't a lot of social media reporting outside of activism. Now it's common. Every single day there are stories unfolding all over the world because of eyewitnesses who have posted photos or videos. It seems like it's second nature now for that to happen, and even now we're seeing that still spread in the countries that have only recently gotten broadband service, and now smartphones are in the hands of more people. So we're seeing a lot more of it than we used to, for sure. But we're also seeing a change in how newsrooms think about this. For a long time, we were the only ones that did anything like this, and newsrooms weren't very well equipped to do it on their own. They didn't know how, didn't have the people. So we're definitely seeing these skills reflected in more newsrooms now. We don't necessarily, there's not necessarily a lot of companies that do what we do, but they are, a lot of newsrooms have started to incorporate this kind of verification into their workflows. they still, we still every day see mistakes get made on social media of big media that's going to see a story happen on social and not verify it, and then run with it and find out that it's wrong later on, or they have the wrong name or the wrong guy, the wrong suspect. That still happens, but I think it happens a lot less than it used to just a few years ago. People are a lot more aware that they can't trust exactly what they see on social media, and that they shouldn't just take content from other people on social media. I think that's something that they've gotten a lot better about as well. So I think over time, we've seen that the industry has gotten a lot smarter about how they use social media and eyewitness media. But also I think that the smarter and have their own expectations about what should happen when they post a photo or video online. They know if it's worth money. They know that if they think that they should be paid for that. They are much better about posting information that kind of helps with verification. So that's pretty interesting too. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Thanks a lot. We have a question in the group chat.
Oh yes, I see that.
Let's go ahead and read it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So for us, obviously we don't usually work with things that are like the BuzzFeed story, but I mean, on a kind of a personal level, I think, I talk a lot. I used to be a professor myself with journalism ethics, and I think that the case of the dossier that BuzzFeed had on Donald Trump, that was one that I was very torn about, because I'm very much in the belief that things that are important should be put before the public, for sure. But often, one thing that drives me crazy as a journalist and as a news consumer these days is that often there will be an interesting and important piece of news, or a piece of, or material that's been leaked, and the news organizations that get it are so eager to get credit for it, or to say that they have it, that they just publish it in full on their sites. We saw that not only with the Trump dossier, but also with Hillary Clinton's email leaks, the John Podesta email leaks in the Hillary Clinton campaign. We see leaks and leaked materials just get posted online, and I don't think that does the service to the audience. So even aside from any ethical questions, which I think there should be several, if you haven't verified that they're legitimate, which is very hard to do, but just because it's hard doesn't mean they shouldn't have done it. But also that there hasn't really been any reporting done on it, that just releasing something out of context and saying, well, this is what we have, this is here. Transparency is great, but giving context and reporting and making a case for why this is or is not real, or is not important, is way more responsible, and is way more in line with what journalists should be doing. So I think even though there are stories that are really important out there, if there hasn't even been a little bit of reporting done, and that you can kind of show that this has been looked into, then I don't think it should be released. Which I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I will have another question. Yeah, please can you mute yourself?
Oh, sure.
Hear myself and can't speak when I hear myself. We keep talking about like the journalist role in verification, and what you are doing as a Storyful, I understand is a kind of service agency in a way for the newsrooms. But what the other actors should do? I mean, we had a lot of discussion about already about what the government should be doing, the because in Czech Republic we have this new unit to fight this disinformation, to put it simply. But there are other actors such as the social media and others. So, I mean, I'm aiming obviously to what Facebook is now doing, and probably others also tagging the so-called fake news or disinformation. So what do you think about the role of other actors? And second part of the question is how this would change your work and your workflows at Storyful if there are these new tools introduced, such as flagging fake news on Facebook, maybe on Twitter, Google, and elsewhere.
Good question. Well, for one thing, I think, the others that are involved in kind of the creation of fake news, even aside from what we're doing on social, I think there are lots of players involved and lots of people who will have to work together to fight that. For one thing, I see what we do as being somewhat different from what we're talking about when we talk about fake news. Certainly, eyewitness media is a part of it and is often the root of some of it, but a lot of it is just produced and shared, not on social. I mean, it's shared as an end product on social, but that it's really about the links that are traveling out there. But anyway, in terms of kind of the responsibility on fake news, I think it falls on multiple levels. For one thing, I think on the social platforms, making it a priority for being able to flag things that are false, things that are misleading. I think the same thing goes for trolling and cyberbullying, because a lot of those things go together. These kind of like mass troll armies online that are pushing misinformation, those all kind of go hand in hand. So having a way for that kind of info to be reported, and also on the financial side, both from the social networks and from the ad networks online where these guys make their money, they have to be a lot more stringent too about shutting off the cash flow of these advertisements onto the fake news websites. So having a way there for people to report this isn't a real site, so that the people who are doing the advertising and placing that on the site, that they're not going to be making money on that. I think it also does fall to journalism outside of us, even of, one of the reasons why people turn to fake news is because they don't trust the mainstream media. So I think we should also be looking at ourselves in mainstream media to see what could we do to make them trust us more. Because even if we go in and say, this is fake, this site's fake, this report isn't real, if they don't believe what we're telling them, then it's not really going to matter. So I think that a lot of news organizations need to find out how to earn the trust back of their readers and find out how they lost it in the first place. And then finally, I do think it's on the readers to some extent as well. I think news literacy and understanding how news is made and what makes a quality news story versus not is something that more people should know. And I think that there's a lot of different ways for that to happen, in schools, through training programs, just through better awareness, even within news stories, of kind of explaining how they work. But even little things like, if this story doesn't have a source in it and there's no quotes in it, then you really shouldn't trust whatever outlandish claim it's making there. So I think that that's also a factor in that. And I know that's one that's being, at least here in the US, has been talked about a lot lately, about how we can get better understanding of how fake news is created out there. And there's been a lot of reporting on that. To your second question, if there are means down the line for fake information to be reported to the social networks and they flag it, I would love that. I think that's great for us. It's something we've really wanted to have happen, especially on the likes of Twitter and Facebook, because then we don't have to spend our time doing it. And of course, we could also participate in something like that, of being able to flag a piece of social content from an eyewitness as, this is verified, this is false, this is misleading. That would be super helpful for us, because right now we're only doing this for newsrooms. But if we were able to be a part of a larger network where regular people in the audience can not only be flagging something that seems false or flagging something to be looked into, but they also could benefit from the work that we do, I think that would be really helpful.